Don't let her fool you. The entire room went dead silent. Every single adult froze. Because a 3-year-old little girl, barefoot in a tiny yellow dress, clutching her stuffed rabbit, pointed her small finger straight at the most powerful woman in the mansion and said 7 words that shook the whole room. Don't let her fool you, Mr. Ethan. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The billionaire in the wheelchair stared at the child. The child stared back, calm, unblinking, completely sure of herself. How did a 3-year-old see what no adult could? What did this little girl know? That was about to bring an entire empire crashing down. Welcome back to Heartbeat Stories, where every story makes you feel something deep inside your soul. We tell the stories that stay with you long after the screen goes dark. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now because you don't want to miss a single story. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, which country are you watching from? We love seeing our family from all around the world. Today's story is going to take you through a powerful emotional journey, one filled with pain, humiliation, unexpected twists, and the kind of courage that will leave you absolutely speechless. There's a life lesson hidden inside this story that most adults take a lifetime to learn. And a 3-year-old figured it out in seconds. Stay with us. Because nothing is what it seems in this mansion. The most dangerous lies are always wrapped in the most beautiful smiles. Before we begin this section, here's a question for you. Have you ever felt that someone was being completely fake around you but everyone else believed them? Drop a yes or a no in the comments right now. The Carter estate sat at the edge of Scottsdale, Arizona, like something out of a dream. 12,000 square feet of marble floors, cathedral ceilings, and floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked a private lake. Manicured gardens stretched out for acres. There were 6 bedrooms, a private gym, a cinema room, and a chef's kitchen that most 5-star restaurants would envy. The driveway alone was longer than most city blocks. And right in the center of all that beauty and all that wealth, sat 35-year-old Ethan Carter, in a wheelchair. 6 months ago, Ethan had been the kind of man people stared at when he walked into a room. Not just because of the money, though the money was impossible to ignore. Carter Technologies was worth over $4 billion, and Ethan had built every single inch of it himself from the ground up, starting when he was barely 22 years old with a laptop and a dream and absolutely nothing else. People stared at Ethan because of the way he carried himself, like the world was a puzzle he had already solved. Confident, always 3 steps ahead. Then came the accident. A rainy Thursday evening on Interstate 17. A truck driver who fell asleep at the wheel. A collision that should have killed Ethan Carter outright, but instead left him with a shattered spine and a long, painful road ahead. The doctors said he might walk again someday. They said might like they meant maybe. And maybe felt very far away on the hard days. The hard days were most days now. But Ethan still had Vanessa. Vanessa Cole was 29 years old, with long dark hair and green eyes that seemed to catch the light from every direction. She was the kind of beautiful that made people forget what they were saying mid-sentence. She had been dating Ethan for 2 years before the accident, and after it, she stayed. She held his hand in the hospital. She moved into the estate to help manage things. She smiled at the cameras when the press came calling, draped elegantly beside his wheelchair, the picture of devoted love. Everyone said the same thing. What a woman! To stand by him like that. True love. The staff said it. His business partners said it. His physical therapist said it with actual tears in her eyes one afternoon. Everyone believed it. Almost everyone. Rosa Mendez had worked at the Carter estate for 3 years. She was 31 years old, quiet and hardworking, with warm brown eyes and calloused hands that never stopped moving. She cleaned the marble floors until they shone like mirrors. She laundered the silk curtains with the care of someone handling sacred things. She arrived every morning at 7 and rarely left before 7 in the evening, and she did all of it with a quiet dignity that was completely her own. Rosa was a single mother. Her daughter Mia was 3 years old. On the days Rosa couldn't find childcare, which happened more often than she liked, because childcare in Scottsdale wasn't cheap, and Rosa's salary, while fair, didn't leave much room for extras, she brought Mia with her to the estate. Mr. Carter had allowed it, quietly, without making a big speech about his own generosity. He had simply said, "Of course, Rosa. She's welcome here," and meant it. Mia was a small child with big, dark, serious eyes that seemed to be constantly studying the world around her, cataloging it, filing things away. She didn't talk much, but when she did, she said exactly what she meant, in simple, clear words, with absolutely no filter between her brain and her mouth. 3-year-olds rarely have filters. But Mia had something else instead. She had attention. She watched everything. She noticed everything. While the adults in the mansion were busy performing their roles, the devoted fiancé, the grateful employer, the professional staff, little Mia sat quietly in corners with her stuffed rabbit, her big eyes moving slowly from face to face, reading something that none of the grown-ups could see. Vanessa did not like Mia. She never said so directly. Women like Vanessa never said things directly. Instead, she had a way of making Rosa feel the dislike like a cold draft in a warm room, always present, never traceable to any single open window. "Rosa, I've told you before, the child's shoes leave marks on the floor," Vanessa said one Tuesday morning, her voice smooth as poured cream, not looking up from her phone. "I shouldn't have to keep repeating myself." Rosa looked at Mia's tiny sneakers. They were clean. The floor was spotless. But she looked down anyway and said, "Yes, Miss Vanessa. I'm sorry." Mia looked at Vanessa with those big, dark eyes. Vanessa didn't look back. People like Vanessa didn't look at people like Mia. That was the first mistake. Later that same week, Vanessa hosted a small luncheon for 3 of her girlfriends, women with sharp jewelry and sharper laughs who moved through the mansion like they owned it. Rosa served the food quietly and efficiently, the way she always did everything. At one point, Rosa accidentally placed a salad fork on the wrong side of a plate. It was a salad fork. On the wrong side. "Rosa." Vanessa's voice cut across the table conversation like a blade through silk. Every face turned. "I genuinely don't understand how you've been working here for 3 years and still cannot manage basic table settings. Is it really that complicated?" Laughter. Soft, tinkling, merciless laughter from the women at the table. Rosa's face flushed deep red. Her hands trembled slightly as she corrected the fork. "I apologize, Miss Vanessa," she whispered. "See that it doesn't happen again," Vanessa said, and turned back to her guests as though Rosa had simply ceased to exist. From across the room, Mia sat on the kitchen step where she'd been quietly eating a cracker. She watched her mother's red face. She watched the women laughing. She watched Vanessa's satisfied little smile. And she filed it away. That small chest rose and fell. Those big dark eyes didn't blink. She was 3 years old. She couldn't fix what had just happened to her mother. She couldn't speak up in ways that would be heard. She couldn't march over and deliver a speech about dignity and respect. But she remembered. Mia always remembered. A wolf wears sheep's clothing only when it needs something from the flock. Here's your question for this section. If you worked for someone and witnessed this kind of cruelty every single day, would you stay or would you walk away? Tell us in the comments. The weeks that followed were a slow education in cruelty, the kind that never left marks, the kind that was always deniable, always wrapped in plausible smiles and perfectly reasonable-sounding words. Vanessa had mastered this particular art form. She called it having standards. She called it running a proper household. She called it making sure the staff understood their role. But Rosa understood what it really was long before she could find the words for it. It was the particular pleasure that some people take in reminding others of the distance between them. Every day brought a new small humiliation. Vanessa would walk through a room Rosa had just finished cleaning and find one thing, always exactly one thing, to criticize. A smudge on a window that Rosa had not made. A cushion that was 1 inch off-center. A vase moved 2 centimeters to the left of where Vanessa preferred it. This simply isn't good enough, Rosa. That sentence, or some version of it, became the background music of Rosa's working days. When Vanessa's friends visited, and they visited often, now that Vanessa was effectively mistress of the Carter estate, Rosa became invisible in a particular pointed way. The kind of invisible where you are clearly seen but actively not acknowledged. Drinks were left empty for Rosa to refill without being asked. Dishes were stacked carelessly for Rosa to collect without being thanked. And if Rosa was ever slow by even a moment, a distracted moment, a moment where maybe she was watching to make sure Mia was okay across the room, Vanessa would catch it. "I don't pay you to daydream, Rosa." She didn't pay Rosa at all, technically. Ethan did. But nobody corrected her on that point. Ethan himself was mostly absent from these daily dynamics. Not physically absent, but emotionally. Since the accident, he had retreated into his work with an intensity that his assistants described as borderline obsessive. He was on calls for 12 hours a day, managing Carter Technologies remotely with grim determination, as though rebuilding his professional power could substitute for everything else the accident had taken from him. He moved through the estate in his wheelchair with his jaw set and his eyes on screens, and the human texture of daily life in the house passed largely beneath his notice. Vanessa made sure of that. She positioned herself as the buffer between Ethan and everything messy, including staff complaints, household issues, and anything that might trouble his focused, fragile peace. "He's under so much pressure, I hate to bother him with small things," she'd say to Rosa, in a tone of deeply caring concern. And then she'd smile that smile. Rosa said nothing to Ethan. She needed this job. The estate paid 3 times what she could earn cleaning offices downtown, and it came with benefits, and it was a 30-minute bus ride from Mia's daycare on the days she had daycare, and Rosa was not in a position to throw those things away because her employer's fiancé was unkind. Lots of employers were unkind. Rosa had survived unkind before. So Rosa kept her head down. She did her work beautifully and without complaint. She protected her dignity in the small private ways available to her, by doing every task so well that no real criticism was ever truly justified, by keeping her voice steady when she wanted to cry, by looking Vanessa calmly in the eye instead of looking away when she was spoken to sharply. And on the days she brought Mia, Rosa dressed her daughter neatly and settled her in a corner with books and crackers and the stuffed rabbit Mia called Bunny, and trusted that the corner was far enough from Vanessa's notice to be safe. She had underestimated Vanessa's radius. One morning Mia wandered, as 3-year-olds do, from her corner into the hallway. She wasn't making noise. She wasn't touching anything. She was simply walking, the way small children walk when they've been sitting still for too long and their little legs need to move. Bunny was tucked under one arm. She wandered into the sunroom, which was Vanessa's favorite room in the morning. All white linen and orchids and pale winter sunlight through tall windows. And Vanessa was there, and Vanessa's friend, a sharp-featured woman named Diane, was there. Vanessa looked up and saw Mia standing in the doorway. "Oh," said Vanessa. The word carried the weight of something much longer. Diane followed her gaze. "Is that the maid's child?" "Unfortunately, yes," Vanessa said. "Rosa brings her when she can't find anyone to watch her." I've been meaning to speak to Ethan about it. Mia stood very still in the doorway. Come here, Vanessa said to her, in the tone someone uses with a pet they haven't decided they like yet. Mia walked over, her sneakers making soft sounds on the tile, her big eyes calm. Vanessa looked her up and down. You shouldn't be in this room, she said. This room isn't for you. Do you understand? Go back to wherever your mother put you. Diane laughed softly. Mia looked at Vanessa for a long moment. Then she said in her small, clear 3-year-old voice, You're not nice. Complete silence. Vanessa's expression shifted in a way that was difficult to read. Something flickered behind those green eyes. Then she smiled, smooth as always. Children should be quiet and respectful, she said. Go find your mother. Mia turned and walked back down the hallway without hurrying. But the look she gave Vanessa before she turned, steady, unafraid, completely clear-eyed, stayed in the room long after she left. Diane raised an eyebrow. Interesting child. She's a child, Vanessa said, picking up her coffee. She doesn't matter. Mia, halfway down the hallway, heard that. She didn't cry. She went back to her corner, sat down next to Bunny, and opened her picture book. But she filed it away. The performance was perfect. But the audience she forgot about was 3 feet tall. Question for you right now. Do you believe that children understand more than adults give them credit for? Comment below, because what happens next will completely change how you think about that question. It was in the 3rd month of this arrangement that Ethan Carter began to change. Not dramatically. Not in ways that anyone who didn't know him well would have noticed. But Rosa noticed because Rosa was quietly perceptive and because she had spent 3 years learning the rhythms of this house the way a musician learns a piece of music. Every note, every pause, every place where something shifts. Ethan began to seem heavier. Not physically. His physical therapy was actually progressing well, and there were days now when he could stand briefly with support, which was better than the doctors had initially predicted. But emotionally, there was a new weight sitting on him that hadn't been there before. A tiredness behind the eyes. A tension in his jaw that didn't release even in the evenings. And he had started asking questions. Small questions, scattered questions, the kind that might not mean anything taken individually. He asked Rosa one morning if she thought the household was running smoothly. He asked whether the staff were happy. He asked, almost offhandedly, whether she had any concerns. Rosa said everything was fine. Because everything was not fine, but the part that wasn't fine was not something Rosa could safely say. Ethan looked at her for a moment with those sharp eyes of his, and something in his expression said he already knew she wasn't giving him everything. But he didn't push. And Rosa didn't volunteer. What Rosa didn't know, what nobody in the household knew yet, was that Ethan Carter had a habit, born from years of building a company in an industry full of people who smiled while looking for leverage. He trusted instinct. He had learned to listen to the quiet feeling in his gut that said something here isn't adding up. That feeling had saved Carter Technologies twice, from partnerships that looked beautiful on paper and turned poisonous in practice. The feeling was talking to him now. It had been talking to him for weeks, in fact. A low, persistent frequency. He couldn't have said exactly what was triggering it. Vanessa was perfect. Attentive, loving, endlessly patient with his difficult moods and his bad days and his frustration with the chair and his rage at his own body's limitations. She said all the right things. She was there every morning and every evening. She was always there. That was almost it, he thought. Not the presence itself, but the management of the presence. The way she positioned herself. The way every conversation looped back eventually to his condition. His vulnerability, his future. The way she'd started talking, gently, lovingly, about his will. About estate planning. about how important it was to have things in order just in case. Just in case. He'd had his lawyer, Marcus Webb, quietly review some documents 2 weeks ago. Not the will, just the company's subsidiary ownership structure. He wasn't sure what he was looking for. He just needed to look. And then came the Tuesday evening that changed everything. It was a small dinner. Just Ethan, Vanessa, and 2 of Ethan's oldest business associates, Gordon Pierce and Sandra Kim. Rosa served. Mia was in the kitchen corner with her crackers and Bunny, tired from a long day, half asleep with her head resting against the wall. The dinner went smoothly until dessert, when Vanessa suddenly put her hand to her head, made a soft sound of distress and said, "I'm sorry, I feel very..." And then she slid gracefully from her chair and collapsed onto the marble floor. It was beautifully done. Rosa had to admit that, in the stunned racing seconds that followed. Vanessa fell in a way that looked completely involuntary but managed to avoid hitting her head on anything. She landed on her side, elegant even in collapse, dark hair spread around her on the white marble. Gordon Pierce leaped to his feet. Sandra Kim called out in alarm. Rosa rushed in from the serving station. Ethan tried to move his wheelchair closer, his face gone white. The room erupted in anxious, overlapping voices. And then, from the kitchen doorway, Mia's small voice cut through every other sound in the room. "Don't let her fool you, Mr. Ethan." Every single person in that room went completely still. Mia was standing in the kitchen doorway in her tiny yellow dress, Bunny hanging from one hand, her dark eyes fixed on Vanessa's motionless form on the floor. She did not look scared. She did not look uncertain. She looked like someone who had just said the truest thing she knew and was prepared to stand behind it. "Mia," Rosa started, her voice horrified. "She's not sleeping," Mia said, with the calm certainty of a child who has not yet learned to doubt what she can see with her own eyes. She opened her eyes and she smiled. Before she fell down. "I saw her." Absolute silence. "Sweetheart," Gordon Pierce said carefully, the way adults speak to small children they're trying not to alarm. "I think she's sick." "She smiled," Mia repeated. Just that. No drama. No performance. Just the simple, solid fact. Ethan was looking at Mia with an expression that Rosa had never seen on his face before. Not dismissal. Not indulgence. Something older and more careful. The look of a man who had trained himself to listen to things that didn't fit the pattern. "Help Miss Vanessa to the couch," he said to Gordon quietly. And then, to no one in particular, "I want to see the security footage from this room. Tonight. This is the moment everything changes. What would you do if you were in Ethan's place right now? A child has just told you something your every adult instinct says cannot be true. The woman you love is lying on your floor. Do you believe the 3-year-old? Or do you let it go? Tell us in the comments. Because Ethan Carter was about to discover that the most important choice of his life wasn't a business decision at all. The truth doesn't need a long speech. Sometimes it only needs 7 words from the right voice. Section question. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you completely trusted? If you feel comfortable, share your story in the comments. You are not alone. Marcus Webb arrived at the Carter estate at 10:30 that night. He was Ethan's lawyer, and he had been Ethan's lawyer since Carter Technologies was worth $20 million instead of $4 billion. And Ethan trusted him the way you trust someone who has seen you at every version of yourself and stayed anyway. Ethan had called him 40 minutes ago. He'd said only 4 words. "I need you here." Marcus had come. They sat together in Ethan's private study, the one room in the estate that was entirely Ethan's, no Vanessa touches, no decorator's choices, just bookshelves and a large desk and the photographs from before the accident that Ethan had never been able to make himself take down. Marcus sat across from the desk. Ethan sat with his laptop open, his face unreadable. The security footage was pulled up. The dining room. 7:43 p.m. Full frame of the table, the serving area, the kitchen doorway. They watched Vanessa put her hand to her head. They watched her begin to slide from the chair. And in the 2 seconds before she reached the floor, 2 seconds that happened in the chaotic moment when everyone's attention was pulled toward the sound of her distress, when every adult in the room was looking at her face or already moving toward her, Vanessa's eyes opened. Fully, clearly, deliberately opened. And she smiled. Small and fast and absolutely certain. The smile of someone who was right on schedule. Then her eyes closed again and she finished the fall, and the room exploded in panic. Marcus was quiet for a long time after the footage ended. "Play it again," he said. Ethan played it again. They watched the eyes open. They watched the smile. "She's 3 years old," Ethan said, meaning Mia. She saw it in real time, in a chaotic room full of panicking adults. She was the only one who caught it. "Ethan." Marcus's voice was careful. "There's something else I have to tell you. About those documents you asked me to review last month." Ethan went still. Marcus opened his briefcase. What he put on the desk in front of Ethan Carter in the next 20 minutes dismantled the last 8 months of Ethan's life like a building coming down floor by floor. It started with the documents. The subsidiary structure that had seemed slightly odd when Ethan had flagged it. When Marcus dug deeper, with investigative intent rather than routine review, what emerged was a pattern. Small transfers. Restructured oversight. A series of decisions that had moved quietly through the company's lower levels during Ethan's recovery, when his attention was consumed by physical therapy and pain management, and the sheer overwhelming effort of relearning how to exist in his body. Decisions that pointed toward someone who knew Carter Technologies intimately, its structure, its vulnerabilities, its internal politics. Someone with access. Someone inside the estate, close enough to Ethan to absorb details, to relay information, to position pieces on a board that Ethan hadn't known was in play. And then Marcus put a name on the table. Daniel Holt, 41 years old, CEO of Meridian Capital, Carter Technologies' most aggressive competitor in the Southwest market. A man who had tried 3 times in 5 years to poach key engineers from Ethan's teams and failed each time. A man who had approached Ethan twice about a merger and been turned down both times. A man, it now emerged, who had been in regular contact with Vanessa Cole for the past 14 months. Before the accident. The contact had started before the accident. Ethan looked at that piece of information for a long time. The accident had been on Interstate 17. A rainy Thursday evening. A truck driver who fell asleep at the wheel. "Marcus," Ethan said, and his voice was very quiet, the quietest Marcus had ever heard it. "Tell me everything." Marcus told him everything. By the time the clock on the study wall showed 1:15 in the morning, Ethan knew the full shape of what had been done to him. Vanessa and Daniel Holt had been involved, romantically and professionally, for over a year before the crash. The plan, as Marcus had reconstructed it from the digital evidence now in the hands of a private investigator Ethan quietly retained, was layered and patient and genuinely sophisticated. It involved Vanessa staying close to Ethan through his recovery, earning his trust, guiding him gently toward estate changes that would give her access to his assets and give Daniel Holt a back door into Carter Technologies at a moment of vulnerability. The faked collapse at dinner had been timed to the arrival of witnesses. A dramatic medical episode, a vulnerable fiancée, a loving partner, and then, at just the right emotional moment, a gentle push toward changing the will. Toward formalizing protections for Vanessa. Toward giving her the kind of legal access to his estate that would take 6 months to untangle if he ever realized the truth. It was a beautiful plan. It had been 3 years in the making. It had been defeated by a 3-year-old in a yellow dress who was paying attention when no one thought she was. Ethan sat in the silence of his study for a long time after Marcus stopped talking. He didn't cry. He wasn't a man who cried easily, and the feelings moving through him right now were too large and too complex to reduce to tears. There was grief, yes. Grief for the version of Vanessa he had believed in, grief for the love he had thought was real, grief for the months of trust he had invested in someone who was counting him. There was rage, contained and cold and focused the way his rage always got when it was serious. There was the particular, specific pain of realizing that an accident he had spent 6 months trying to make peace with might not have been an accident at all. And underneath all of it, underneath every dark and difficult thing he was feeling in that room at 1 a.m, there was something unexpected. There was gratitude. For a barefoot 3-year-old with a stuffed rabbit and the simple, unshakable conviction to say what she saw. She never asked for a reward. She just told the truth. But sometimes telling the truth changes everything for everyone. Final section question. What do you think is the most important lesson a child can teach an adult? Tell us in the comments. We read every single one. Vanessa was gone by morning. Not quietly. Nothing about Vanessa was ever truly quiet, but quickly, in the way of someone who can read a situation and knows when it has turned. When Ethan's assistant knocked on her guest's suite door at 7 a.m. and said simply, "Mr. Carter would like you to leave the estate," Vanessa knew from the tone that something had shifted past the point of recovery. She asked no questions. She took what was hers. She was in a car within the hour. Whatever conversation passed between Ethan and Vanessa before she left, if there was one, Rosa never learned the details. She suspected there wasn't much to say. Evidence tends to reduce the available vocabulary. The legal proceedings that followed were extensive and would take the better part of 18 months to fully resolve. Daniel Holt and Vanessa Cole both faced serious consequences. Fraud charges, breach of fiduciary duty, and a civil suit from Carter Technologies that became a significant chapter in Arizona business news. The matter of the accident on Interstate 17 was referred to investigators, though what they ultimately found Rosa also never knew for certain, because by then her life had moved into different terrain. But that morning, the morning after, Rosa arrived at the estate at 7 as she always did, not knowing what had happened, and found Ethan Carter sitting in the main hallway in his wheelchair, facing the front door. He looked like a man who had been up all night and had arrived, through the long dark hours, at some new country in himself. Older than yesterday. Lighter somehow despite everything. Rosa stopped when she saw him. "Mr. Carter, I'm sorry, I didn't know if you'd need me to." "Rosa." His voice was calm. "Is Mia with you today?" Rosa hesitated. Mia was outside in the car, where Rosa had told her to wait while she checked whether everything was okay to come in. "She is, sir. I can take her to my sister's if. Please bring her in." Rosa went back to the car and unbuckled Mia from her car seat. Mia was carrying Bunny. She was wearing a red dress today and her hair was in 2 small braids. She took Rosa's hand and walked into the mansion the way she always did, quietly with those steady dark eyes open. Ethan was waiting in the hallway. When Mia saw him, she stopped. She looked up at him with her serious face. Ethan looked at her for a long, quiet moment. Then he did something that Rosa would remember for the rest of her life. He leaned forward in his wheelchair so he was closer to Mia's level, and he said simply and seriously, as though he were speaking to an equal rather than a child, "Thank you, Mia. You were very brave. And you told me the truth when nobody else could." Mia considered this for a moment. The way she considered things, carefully without hurry. Then she said, "Lying is wrong." "Yes," Ethan said. It is. Mama told me, Mia said. She looked at Rosa briefly. She says always tell the truth even if it's hard. Ethan looked up at Rosa then, and something in his expression made Rosa's throat close up unexpectedly. She sounds like she's a wonderful teacher, he said. Rosa couldn't speak for a second. She just nodded. In the weeks that followed, Ethan Carter made changes. Some of them were legal and financial. The protections against future vulnerability that Marcus guided him through, the organizational restructuring of Carter Technologies, the long and thorough process of understanding exactly how much damage had been done and what it would take to repair it. But some of the changes were smaller, quieter, the kind that don't make headlines. He started being present in his own home in ways he hadn't been for months. He came out of his study during the day. He began to notice, really notice, the people who moved through the spaces around him. He learned the names of every member of his household staff. He asked how they were, and he waited for the actual answer, not the polite one. He had Mia's corner in the kitchen quietly upgraded. A proper little table, a small bookshelf, art supplies that appeared without announcement one morning alongside a note that said for Mia, from Ethan. He met with Rosa privately in his study one afternoon and told her clearly and without drama that she was valued, that her contribution to the estate was genuine and respected, and that going forward she would receive a raise that actually reflected that. He told her that if she ever encountered treatment in this house that made her feel like anything less than the professional she was, he wanted to know. Rosa held herself together through most of that conversation. She cried on the bus ride home. Good tears. The kind that have been waiting a long time. The day that Rosa later said she would keep in her heart forever was an ordinary Saturday in October. 3 weeks after everything changed. Ethan had started working on his mobility with renewed determination. There was a new physical therapist now, a former Army rehabilitation specialist named Joe who didn't believe in either pity or limits, and Ethan had taken to him immediately. That Saturday, with Rosa nearby and Mia playing with her art supplies at her little table, Ethan took 4 steps in the hallway. 4 steps. Supported by the parallel bars Joe had installed, but 4 steps with his own feet on the marble floor he'd spent 6 months rolling across. He stopped. He stood there in the October light. Mia looked up from her drawing. She got down from her little chair and walked over to the edge of the parallel bars, and she stood there with Bunny tucked under her arm, and she looked up at Ethan with her big, serious, honest eyes. Then she raised her small hand and clapped. Once, twice, 3 times. The delighted, wholehearted clapping of a 3-year-old who does not care about being cool. Ethan laughed. Rosa had not heard him laugh like that since before the accident. It came from somewhere real, somewhere that had been locked up for a long time and had finally found the key. Joe, the physical therapist, rubbed his eye, said it was sweat. Nobody argued. In the end, what Ethan Carter said in the interview that ran in the Arizona Business Journal 4 months later, the one about his recovery, his company's resilience, and what the whole terrible ordeal had taught him, was this. I had spent 15 years learning to read people. I had advisors, analysts, security consultants. I had all the apparatus that money can build to protect itself. And none of it caught what a 3-year-old caught in 2 seconds because she was simply paying attention and she wasn't afraid to say what she saw. That's the lesson, honestly. Truth doesn't need resources. It doesn't need sophistication. It just needs someone brave enough to say it out loud. The real miracle of Mia wasn't what she saw. It was that she spoke. In a world that had spent weeks teaching her without words that she was invisible. Too small, too young, too unimportant to matter. She opened her small mouth and said the true thing clearly and without apology. She was 3 years old. She didn't know she was supposed to be quiet. She didn't know the rules about who gets to speak and who is supposed to stay in their corner. She just knew what she had seen, and she knew it was wrong, and she said so. And that was enough. That was more than enough. It was everything. The most powerful voice in the room isn't always the loudest. Sometimes it belongs to the smallest person with the biggest eyes and the simplest, clearest, most unshakable sense of what is right. Never underestimate a child's ability to see the truth. And never stop teaching them that the truth is worth speaking, even when their voice shakes, even when it doesn't, as it turned out, shake at all. If this story moved you, if you felt something in your chest during that hallway scene, or when Ethan laughed for the first time, or when little Mia clapped her hands, then you already understand why we tell these stories. Because this world is full of people who need to be reminded that courage comes in all sizes, that truth matters, that the people who are treated as invisible are often the ones who can see the clearest. If this story touched your heart, please give it a like. It takes 1 second and it means the world to us. Subscribe to Heartbeat Stories so you never miss a story that makes you feel something real. Drop a comment and tell us, which moment hit you the hardest? Was it Mia's words at the dinner table? Ethan's gratitude in the hallway? Or those 4 steps on a Saturday morning in October? And please, share this story with someone who needs to hear it today. Friend, parent, someone going through something hard. Sometimes the right story at the right moment changes everything. We'll see you in the next one. Until then, be kind, be brave, and always, always tell the truth.